Brought down by bad mortgage investments, Lehman, which has 25,000 employees, will be liquidated.
The federal government loans American International Group, AIG, $85 billion.
This is a different kind of market, and the Fed is asleep.
The federal government is stepping in to stabilize Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, the two mortgage giants that have been threatened by the housing crisis.
The Bank of England has pumped £75 billion more into Britain's ailing economy with a new round of quantitative easing.
You print a couple $1 trillion, and all of a sudden, people start to worry. So out of this worry, we have something called the Bitcoin.
Welcome to On the Brink. I'm Matt Walsh.
And I'm Nick Carter.
And we're back to the old school way of taping this. So we are on a single mic in person at Consensus.
Yeah, so you're going to have to bear with us in terms of audio quality issues.
Yeah, it's back to how we originally used to tape this, but the show must go on. We're doing this at about 3 o'clock Eastern time right now, so a lot could still happen this week, but this is when we could tape it.
And you're about to go on stage with the one and only Abby Johnson for a little fireside chat.
And that's how dedicated we are to the podcast. Just cranking out these podcasts middle of the day, just hot as hell down here. It's like 105 degrees.
Yeah, I applaud Barry for his decision to take the conference out of New York, but at the same time, it's the middle of the summer and it's Austin and it's 1,000 degrees here.
I still think it's worth the trade-off. I mean, you don't want to be having a crypto conference in the city of New York, just a very, very hostile environment for a crypto company. You have to move it to Austin. So I very much applaud him.
And we have some news regarding New York actually this week. But first,
let's get into the metrics minute. Let's kick it over to you. I think I heard that there's going to be some interesting things about exchange volumes. Do I have that right?
So you actually had a line there which you flubbed. You were meant to say, I've been really curious about crypto exchange volume lately.
Oh yeah, let me recalibrate that. So the coin metrics minute. Nick, I've been really curious about exchange volume lately.
It's meant to be like a subtle segue into anyway, it doesn't matter. Oh yeah? Well, then you're going to love this week's Metrics Minute presented by Coin Metrics.
It's pretty good. Who's writing these? I like this.
Yeah, so here we go. So May 2022 was the first time when total Bitcoin and Ethereum spot trading was higher on FTX than Coinbase.
Wow, not bad.
Yeah, that's actually pretty notable. Of the 145 new tradable assets added to Coinbase since January 1st, 2020, wow, that's a lot. 116 were ERC20 tokens. On June 1st of this year, spot volume on Coinbase was $2.5 billion. About $1 billion was Bitcoin, 570 million was ETH, and 370 million was ERC20s. Now moving to Binance, 70% of all spot volume came from USDT quoted markets.
Wow, that is fascinating.
Okay, well, that wasn't exactly the line, but close enough. Anyway, you know it. Coinmetrics is an industry-leading provider of institutional-grade crypto market network data research and risk management products. Link is in the show notes for more about exchange volume and CM research.
Just go buy an enterprise data contract, really. That's the call to action. If you are at a big business that's doing anything in crypto, you need good data, and that's what Coinmetrics is there for. So that was the Metrics Minute. And we had a busy week this week. I mean, just an incredible amount of deals announced this week. That's every year at Consensus, you just have deals. So we've got 3 actually in the Castle Island portfolio. First one up is TYB, which is a blockchain loyalty and rewards platform. They have raised $9.8 million from Unusual Ventures, Castle Island Ventures, SoGal Ventures, and others.
Next up, also in the Castle Island portfolio, Mash, which is a content monetization platform using the Lightning Network. They raised $6 million from us, Whitecap Venture Partners, and others. I will also be joining the board in conjunction with that fundraise.
Really excited to keep on doubling down on Mash. That's an exciting business.
Yeah, so basically, internet content monetization is broken. It's all ad-based or affiliate-based or subscription-based. And shouldn't you be able to do pay as you enjoy? Well, I certainly think so, and so does Mash. However, the payments infrastructure we had online wasn't sufficiently granular or high frequency before. Lightning fixes this. I would say uniquely fixes this. So this is what Mash does. Low barriers to entry, to enjoy monetized content on the internet. Very excited about it. Happy to join the board.
Congrats to the MASH team. Next one up is also a Castle Island deal, Pintu, which is an Indonesian crypto brokerage. They raised $113 million in a Series B from Pantera, Lightspeed India, Intudo, Northstar, and others. Congrats to Jeff and the Pintu team.
Next up, outside of the portfolio, we have Entropy, a decentralized digital asset custodian. They raised $25 million from Andreessen Horowitz and others.
Next is a strategic investment. Coinbase has apparently made a strategic investment in a Singapore-based exchange called ZipMex. There was initially some reports that Coinbase was going to buy this company, but it looks like the way it netted out was a strategic investment. So continuing to see Coinbase invest via their venture portfolio in all sorts of businesses internationally.
Next up, we have Euler. Like the mathematician, they are a non-custodial borrow-lend protocol on Ethereum. They raised $32 million from Han Ventures and others.
Next is Legible, a crypto accounting and tax firm. They have raised $20 million. It was led by EJF Capital.
So that's a portmanteau of Ledger and Legible. I think that gets my early vote for startup name of the week.
I like Euler. Euler is a good one. They're head-to-head for me right now.
I love a good portmanteau. Next up, Animoca Brands. I feel like they're in this every single week. They have acquired, also in great names, Notre Game. Notre Game. How good is that? A mobile gaming firm incorporates physical items into its titles. Hopefully it does not burn down unexpectedly.
Have you, my mind did not actually go to the Cathedral, but went to Rudy, which is an all-time sports movie.
I believe the Cathedral preceded the university.
I think the church came first, but then Rudy was second.
So yeah, maybe it is named after the school. Next up, we have Navigate, Web3 data sharing and monetization platform. There is $7.6 million from Distributed Global, Kraken Ventures, Alan Howard, and others.
Next one up is Delphia. This is an algorithmic stock advisor. They have raised $60 million from Multicoin, FTX, Ribbit, and others. Every time you see algorithmic anything, just after Terra, you kind of, not that this is anything bad, but I am triggered by the word algorithmic these days.
Next up, we have Calaxy, a social platform. Just names are just off the chain this time. Social platform for content creators and their fans, founded by the NBA player Spencer Dinwiddie. They've raised $26 million from the HBAR Foundation, Animoca Brands, Polygon, and others.
Speaking of the NBA, what a Celtics game last night. I don't know if you caught that, but we're up 2-1 right now. It's looking pretty good, knock on wood.
All I know is that my beloved Miami Heat are out, so that ended the playoffs for me.
Yeah, we ended that for you, yeah.
I'm not actually a basketball fan, but maybe the NFL will be back one day. We can talk about it.
Yeah, we'll talk about the NFL when it comes back. Next one is Geode Finance. This is a staking solution for DAOs. They've raised $3 million from Multicoin.
Then we've got Samu Dai, a DAO tooling platform. They raised $2.5 million from FTX, Sino Global, Coinbase, Balaji Srinivasan, and others.
Next one up is Virgo CX, a Canadian crypto exchange. Canada just had a tough run with crypto exchanges over the years. They have raised $8 million from Draper Dragon and others. I don't know if we talked about this on the podcast, but I finally watched that Quadriga documentary, and that was ugly. You feel bad for all the people that just lost their shirts in that Quadriga scandal.
And think about the fact that was only 300 million or so, and Terra evaporated 50 billion or so.
Yeah, I guess a little bit different in the sense that Terra evaporated a lot of just VC unrealized gains, whereas this Quadriga thing was just people's life savings.
But a lot of it was UST. I would say the UST was the more material loss because people sort of trusted it. And there were fintechs whereby you could deposit into UST and things like that.
Yeah, and there was that New York Times article, right? Some of the retail folks are starting to emerge here. We're going to see a lot of class action lawsuits.
Totally. Next up, Valkyrie, crypto asset manager. They raised $11 million from BNY Mellon, Wedbush, and others.
Interesting to see BNY invest in a crypto asset management firm. Boney just starting to make more and more moves in the space. Good to see. Next one up is Scalum. This is a data and trade execution platform focused on DeFi. They have raised $20 million in a round led by Galaxy Digital.
Then we've got MachineFi Lab, a Web3 IoT data collection platform. They raised $10 million from Samsung, Draper Dragon, Jump, and others.
We have another crypto accounting firm next. It's Cryptio, an institutional-grade crypto accounting firm, have raised $10 million in a round that was led by Point9.
Wow, there's a lot of deals this week. So Ledger and Cathay Innovation are launching a $110 million fund focused on Web3.
Next is Orderly Network. This is a decentralized exchange built on the Near protocol. They have raised $20 million from Three Arrows, Pantera, Dragonfly, and Jump.
Then we've got Tatsumiko, an MMORPG game built on Discord, has raised $7.6 million from Delphi, Binance, Defiance, and others.
Super Team, which is a blockchain game, they've raised $10 million from Griffin Gaming, Powerhouse Capital, Michael Eisner, and others. Michael Eisner does crypto deals? Well, who knew? He was what a legend at Disney.
Lastly, we have Solana Ventures and the Solana Foundation are committing $100 million to support South Korean crypto projects.
Like Terra?
Luna 2.0, it's back.
Well, those are the deals of the week. Just a ton of them. We've probably missed 10 or 15 deals because deals are just getting announced left and right down here at Consensus. But we have some news this week. So I guess let's jump off into the bill, the long-awaited bill. So Senators Kirsten Gillibrand and Cynthia Lummis have released a bipartisan proposal of a proposed regulatory framework for crypto. And it's pretty interesting, I would say. So I'm going to just hit on some of the main points here. There's actually a great Medium post that was put out by Senator Gillibrand. I guess the first thing I'll say is that I'm not sure if this has any legs to it, but I think it's a good step in the right direction. So the first thing is this would set out a clear standard for determining which digital assets are commodities and which are securities, which is obviously a really tricky situation. This bill seems to take a view on that and would effectively put a bunch of these things into the commodity bucket. There would be more clear definitions, amplifying the Howey test. And this would also very clearly assign regulatory authority over the digital asset spot market to the CFTC, which is going to be very controversial, I would imagine, with folks that are more aligned with the SEC. There's some stuff in there about stablecoins, strong requirements for stablecoins to have disclosures, protect customers, have faster payments. There's an advisory committee for guiding principles for regulatory agencies. There's all sorts of disclosure requirements that would be required by virtual asset service providers. There's something in here around a digital asset energy consumption study that they would be put forward by FERC. Is that how you say it? Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. And close enough. There's a ton in here, a couple more things. So it would direct the CFTC and the SEC to study and report on the development of a self-regulatory organization, which is desperately needed. That would be the equivalent of FINRA, but for digital assets, it sounds like. There would be more and more studies. There would be a sandbox. You get the drill. A de minimis exemption, clarity on taxes. There's a ton of good stuff in here. I guess the question is, will this go anywhere?
Yeah, pretty exciting, honestly. I like a lot of this stuff. I like asking digital asset platforms to follow some stronger disclosure standards for the assets they're listing so that their clients can make good decisions. I like the de minimis exemption. I like empowering the CFTC as opposed to the SEC. I think everybody should like that. I don't love this weird study on energy consumption. We talk about that enough, I think. I do like the idea of potentially setting the stage for a crypto SRO. I think that'd be great.
Desperately needed. There have been various attempts at these SROs over the years, but they just haven't gotten the industry buy-in yet. I think it's critical to have an SRO.
So I think this bill shows a lot of maturity and a pretty deep understanding of crypto markets in general, and it addresses a lot of the problems. Regulatory clarity over what is considered security, making sure that these digital asset platforms, the intermediaries, are behaving well, tax questions, disclosure. Now, the prospects for it to pass seem close to zero in this current Congress, if we're going to be honest. However, I think the understanding is that at a minimum, some of these pieces would make their way piecemeal into subsequent legislation. So this is kind of a starting point. This contains a lot of ideas. Some of these ideas will make their way into legislation. And if there is a change in the political winds in November, perhaps, then maybe we would see something like this bill. But don't hold your breath for it to be passed anytime soon.
And so I guess why is this not a viable bill? Is this just general gridlock here? Because it is bipartisan.
Yeah, well, bipartisan doesn't mean that all senators and certainly not bicameral support the bill. It just means that there's two members of two different parties that are kind of sponsoring it. I wouldn't say that Lummis or Gillibrand have the cachet to kind of push this through themselves. It's obviously great that it's bipartisan. A lot of these issues are not partisan. But yeah, I would say the main reason is simply that Washington is very inoperative right now. And in advance of the primaries, you're just not going to see a lot of cooperation. Neither party is going to want to give the other party a win. You're just not going to see a lot of legislation pass. And we're also looking at the summer recess as well.
One of the things I'm most excited about this bill is the idea that the CFTC would play a greater role in the spot market. I think that would be huge. It makes a lot of sense from a few different perspectives. I mean, obviously, Bitcoin and Ethereum are not securities. At least I think we've been pretty clear about that as an industry, and we've heard that from regulators. And also just the SEC has a lot on their plate right now. I mean, you have the payment for order flow issue, you've got SPACs, you've got ESG. I mean, the CFTC just seems better equipped to regulate this spot market, in my opinion.
And just being realistic, I would say that crypto assets, certain crypto assets, in particular Bitcoin, actually are commodities. Like, that is how I would describe Bitcoin. It is definitely not, it doesn't contain any cash flow or dividends. It's not a claim on the residual earnings of a company. To me, it is a commodity. So just from a philosophical perspective, I think the Commodity Futures Trading Commission should regulate commodities. I think that's pretty straightforward.
It's kind of crazy. I think the U.S. is one of the only developed nations that actually has a separation between the regulator for commodities and the regulator for securities. But you could actually see how this could be a mess even if the CFTC gets it. I mean, imagine a world where there's, Coinbase has 100 crypto assets on their platform. Some get deemed to be securities. Some are commodities. And so what do you just have the CFTC and the SEC regulating you at the same time and giving you conflicting guidance? I mean, that could be a total mess.
Yeah, so that's probably the future here is the platforms these things trade on will have multiple regulators. I do like that there's an interesting delineation of what constitutes a commodity versus a security in the bill. I expect that will be among the most scrutinized language because that's effectively the first time we've really been given a kind of a bright line test on this.
All right, so let's move on here. We'll keep an eye on that bill. Just a quick update on this New York State Senate issue around proof of work mining. So that bill has passed the Senate, and it would create a 2-year ban on proof of work powered mining if you are not using renewables effectively. And it's sitting with the governor for signature, but she has not signed it yet.
Yeah, so she almost certainly will sign it. So what that bill effectively does is, I know some of us were kind of memeing about New York banning SHA-256. What it actually does is if you are creating a new facility to mine Bitcoin with, let's say, a power asset which you own and you're doing a kind of a co-located model, and that is a thermal-based generation power asset, non-renewable, then you're not going to be able to get permitted for that. It doesn't mean that miners in New York are going to have to turn off their operations. They're still going to be able to be active, including miners using natural gas, for instance. It certainly doesn't mean that if you're using grid power to mine, especially in the north, upstate New York, you're not going to be off. However, the optics aren't great. We're talking about a state going after a type of computation and going after entities that are duly consuming electricity that they've purchased, which I would say potentially raises constitutional issues in terms of 1A. I think there's probably questions about should states be allowed to determine what a valid use of power is and is not. But yeah, certainly not a good development here, but it also doesn't immediately directly affect any of the miners that are active in New York. But definitely makes the state inhospitable to future miners.
I mean, if consensus ever, if you ever want consensus back, my sense is that you don't want to sign this bill. I don't think there will be any consensus at the Marriott Marquis anymore if this bill goes through.
So elsewhere around the globe, pretty much the opposite of the New York thing is happening, which is our beloved nation of the Central African Republic.
There is just a sleeper here, but they're doing big things.
So I invite you all to read this deck. It reminds me of I think it's a hybrid of the WeWork deck, if you remember the infamous WeWork deck.
The one where the unicorn got stuck in the trough but was trying to fly out?
Yeah, that one precisely, where there was the arrow which was going down, and then it was sort of pathway to EBITDA positive. And it reminds me of a hybrid of the WeWork deck and of the the Neom plans. You know that city in Saudi Arabia, which is the futuristic new city called Neom?
Not super familiar with that one.
So it's a huge, massive development where Saudi Arabia is trying to sort of diversify and build a massive tourist city, basically. And Project Sango, which is the code name for the Bitcoin city in the Central African Republic, has sort of a bit of both. So basically, there's a lot in there, but it's going to be a Bitcoin city, and they're going to tokenize their natural resources, and they're going to have favorable tax policy, and there's a lot of renderings of cool-looking buildings, and they're going to create a Bitcoin city down there in the heart of Africa.
I'm probably going to be wave 2 of tourism there. I'm going to wait to see how wave 1 goes, but I'd very much be open for business on entertaining the idea of going to Sango for wave 2.
Yeah, give it some time. Central African Republic, one of the poorest nations in the world. It kind of reminds me a little bit of the Salvadoran idea of the Bitcoin city, which I think is also probably on hold given that they look like they're defaulting.
I don't know why we need to do these Bitcoin Fire Festival things. It's just you can be energetic about Bitcoin without creating a big thing, telling everyone to come and just not having things work. Just the Bitcoin Fire Fest thing is the bad meme.
Yeah, to be clear, you don't need a Bitcoin city, just pass favorable tax policy, I guess, and maybe hold some Bitcoin in your sovereign reserves. That's basically it. You don't have to do any more, nation states of the world.
Well, let's move on to some other news here. So Custodia Bank, which is a Bitcoin bank founded by Caitlin Long, it's based out in Wyoming. They got the Speedy, so they got the Wyoming Special Purpose Depository Institution a while ago, and they have been applying for a Federal Reserve master account, and it hasn't happened, so it's been delayed. The company is now suing the Federal Reserve Board of Governors and the Federal Reserve Bank of Kansas City, and they're charging that they have unlawfully delayed for 19 months, basically without acting on this master account. What do you make of this?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of shenanigans here with the Federal Reserve. I'm pretty sympathetic to Custodia, formerly known as Avanti. Ordinarily, according to the lawsuit, it takes 5 to 7 days to act on a master account application. This one has been outstanding for well over a year. So I think basically the suit is asking the Federal Reserve to act, whether it is deny or approve the access. I see no reason why it should be denied. To me, this just looks like the Fed understands that they ought to grant the master account to Custodia. They're just unwilling to. But I would say precedent here suggests that you probably should be acting within a year. So I'm definitely on Custodia's side in this lawsuit.
Yeah, I hope they can get to a good conclusion on that one. In other sort of banking and stablecoin news, so a bunch of stuff happened this week. So Japan passed some stablecoin regulation, basically saying that stablecoins in that country that want to be recognized have to allow full redemption. The same thing came out of the New York DFS this week. It essentially suggested, and we should talk about this a little bit more in terms of how this impacts certain market players, but the NYDFS came out with guidance. There's kind of 3 baseline requirements. The first is that the stablecoin must be fully backed by reserve assets equal to the value of the outstanding supply at the end of every day. The second is that the reserve must be held in custody by a federally chartered depository institution, and that it can only consist of reserves of U.S. Treasury bills, collateralized reverse repo agreements, deposit accounts, or other assets, whatever that means. Cash, I guess. And then finally, that the reserve has to be examined by a CPA every single month, and that there needs to be an annual report. Seems pretty reasonable, I guess, on the face of it, but it'll be interesting. The net effect here could be that the realm of potential stablecoin issuers here just becomes a lot smaller.
Yeah, and to be clear, this guidance applies to the issuers of stablecoins that are regulated by the NYDFS. There are some. They exist. Stablecoins are issued on the New York Trust Charter, under the Nevada Charter.
There's a Boston, a little Boston language.
And under the state-by-state MTL, and under no regulatory oversight regime, as the case with some stablecoins. So I found this interesting in terms of defining the types of reserved. I believe there's also something in here about the reserves backing the stablecoin cannot be independently utilized by the banks for other purposes.
And so that's a big one, right? So let's just use a hypothetical example that you have a stablecoin issuer and they use a few banks on the back end. Now, those banks are doing fractional reserve off of their deposit base. And so it strikes me that would actually become a really important distinction in issuing stablecoins. It's actually something that Alan Lane was talking about on Odd Lots a couple of weeks ago, which I thought was a great podcast. You're really going to have, it sounds like you're really just going to have immobilized cash, reverse repo, or treasuries in an account somewhere and not have any fractional reserve off of that.
Yeah, but the thing is, for banks, immobilized capital is pretty expensive, right? And it reduces your discretion. You don't want to really have a ton of immobile, siloed off capital. This also echoes some critiques I've read of stablecoins, I think originating with the FT and Isabella Kaminska, that stablecoins are kind of a collateral sinkhole, and they suck treasuries out of the system because they can't be redeployed or sort of rehypothecated. And I'm also sympathetic to that, although maybe for maximum security and soundness, you wouldn't want the collateral to be repurposed for any other purpose.
I mean, you can see why the executive order calls for a lot of analysis on stablecoin infrastructure here. It's clear that as this gets bigger, some of these systemic issues will come into play. And, you'll probably have some entrepreneurs that look at this and say, we're not going to go that path. We're just going to start a new layer one blockchain and do an algorithmic stablecoin.
Right.
All right, so why don't we transition over to some Binance news? So there's a couple things this week. So there's a big Reuters article that came out that said that Binance was a hub for hackers, fraudsters, drug traffickers, and that there had been approximately $2.35 billion in illicit funds laundered on the platform. Binance actually came back at this pretty hard with a very long blog post refuting and providing a full trail of communications, according to them, basically harshly criticizing the coverage and the data gathering process. So, who knows there? Only bring that up to say that they are clearly in the crosshairs of the media. They are also apparently in the crosshairs of the SEC. So the SEC is reportedly investigating whether or not BNB is an unregistered securities offering. BNB, of course, is the exchange token from Binance. It seems like the SEC would have actually a pretty strong case on this one, I would think.
So I don't think I've read a blog post from a major crypto platform that's sort of this strident in pushing back against the press. This is really quite something. They also published an email exchange that they had with Reuters journalists, claiming that would vindicate them. So I don't necessarily have a view on this. I encourage you to read the whole exchange.
What's your take on this BNB situation? I mean, if it is an unregistered securities offering, does it actually change much? I mean, they're operating outside of the United States. I guess maybe they sold it to U.S. retail. Maybe that happened. But what would the impact here be?
So BNB was released in 2017. Statute of limitations for securities laws is typically 5 years, so we're actually coming up on it. However, the SEC can always go to you and ask to extend it with a tolling agreement, I believe. So statute is not necessarily that firm. It was an ICO straight to all comers, retail. Obviously, if you participate in the ICO, I think they raised $30 million. You did extraordinarily well. That doesn't mean it wasn't an unregistered security. It probably looked like one. There's a lot of rev share mechanics in there, or rather revenue being redirected into a burn. They then changed the white paper, which is kind of like changing your incorporation documents or your charter. You really shouldn't be able to do that unilaterally or untransparently. So I believe they later altered the nature or purpose of the token to sort of make it more resistant to the securities law analysis. But that just raises further questions about should they have the right to do that, and can you just change the purpose of the token unilaterally? So yeah, I think the securities law analysis would fall pretty firmly in the affirmative in the case of BNB. Now, that said, can the SEC actually do anything about it? Color me doubtful about that.
I mean, the SEC still has the Ripple case. That's been going on forever. Picking a fight with Binance here, it seems like that could take a while too. All right, well, I want to get your view on this New York Times article. Apparently, Bitcoin is not as decentralized, according to the New York Times, and a paper that doesn't seem like it was peer-reviewed at all. What's going on here?
Yeah, so shout out to Colleen Sullivan on this one for getting it on my radar. The New York Times had a front page print edition article plus 4,000-word article on the website called How Trustless is Bitcoin Really? Subtitle, In Myth, the cryptocurrency is egalitarian, decentralized, and all but anonymous. The reality is very different, scientists have found. And this is one of the most curious New York Times articles I think I've ever encountered. It is all based on this paper called Cooperation Among an Anonymous Group Protected Bitcoin During Failures of Decentralization. So certainly incendiary title, written by a bunch of 7 different authors, the main one being Alyssa Blackburn. I can grab this. And none of them appear to be crypto experts. Some of them look like they don't have PhDs. They don't all appear to be actual sort of full-time academics. And the paper's not peer-reviewed. It's not published in a journal. So it's very curious because normally you would not see glowing coverage of a manuscript like this written up glowingly in the New York Times. That's just very irregular, very irregular. It's a draft. There's no real determination from serious peers that the paper is good. And actually, I read the paper, and I can tell you it's not good. It's interesting, but it doesn't find what they think it finds. It certainly doesn't find what the New York article alleges it finds. So basically, what it actually is they look at early mining in Bitcoin. For the first 2 years, for the period before Bitcoin was worth $1, so the very, very early days. And they determined that there are about 64 major agents that were actually active in mining Bitcoin in 2009, 2010. Obviously, Satoshi was one, and early GPU miners were others. The way in which they associate blocks to these agents is kind of interesting. It's similar to Sergio Lerner's analysis. If you remember reading about that, with how Sergio determined what blocks Satoshi mined. I won't go into detail, but they use the same methodology. So they decide that there are a small number of agents active in the Bitcoin early days. They also find that at certain times, some of these agents had more than 50% of hash power, and they mined more than 6 blocks in a row. Satoshi was one, of course. We know that Satoshi had the bulk of hash power in the early days. They also find that early GPU miners had control because they had vastly better computational resources than their CPU mining competitors. Again, this isn't new. We knew this. Like Laszlo was an early GPU miner. That's why Laszlo got all the coins that Laszlo spent on the pizzas. And that's actually Satoshi admonished Laszlo for doing that, for accumulating so many coins quote unquote unfairly. So we kind of knew that there were times in the very early days before Bitcoin was worth anything when certain entities had lots of hash power. So it's not a surprise. But the authors characterize it as a surprise, or they characterize it as ironic. So they say stuff like, quote, rather than relying exclusively on a decentralized trustless network of anonymous actors, Bitcoin depended on altruistic behavior by a group of anonymous agents. But that's just not true, you know. They also say, these data determined that Bitcoin was often vulnerable to 51% attacks. As Bitcoin's price neared $1, a 51% attack could become increasingly lucrative for the attacker, yet such attacks would rapidly undermine Bitcoin's credibility. They basically are implying that Bitcoin is extraordinarily fragile and that the actors were unusually altruistic and cooperative with each other in order to not plunder Bitcoin. But this isn't how 51% attacks work. 51% attacks, you don't just put your you don't just plunge your hand into the blockchain and pull money out. You need there to be commerce. You need there to be an entity for you to defraud, to conduct a double spend against, whether that's a merchant that's giving you real world goods or an exchange. Those didn't really exist. Bitcoin wasn't worth anything. When Bitcoin was worth $1, the market cap of all Bitcoin was $3 or $4 million. So the prize was not there. There was no economic activity on Bitcoin. There were a tiny handful of exchanges happening on Bitcoin talk forums and things like that. So to say that Bitcoin sort of narrowly survived 51% attacks is to be completely ignorant of the context, which was there wasn't economic activity, so there was no entity that you could target for a 51% attack, and moreover, there was no money to be made doing that. So of course, when the stakes were low, it's okay that there was a small handful of agents that were mostly doing the mining. If you actually look at the paper, it became very decentralized pretty rapidly once the GPU mining era started in full in late 2010. So, these findings are, very mundane and not really news to anybody, but they're being characterized as finding that Bitcoin is not anonymous, that the decentralization is a myth, that the miners had to be altruistic. Just none of those things are true. So, the other thing is the New York Times uses this paper to kind of allege that Bitcoin isn't anonymous. But in the paper, they don't actually de-anonymize anyone. So they just, cluster agents. They ascribe blocks to agents. So there's no de-anonymization. Basically, the paper says one thing, and then the New York Times vastly exaggerates the findings. So anyway, extremely curious case here. What I want to know is why this paper got such glowing coverage and so much time in the New York Times on the front page, 4,000 words. None of it makes sense. And if you read the paper, you'll see there's nothing fundamentally novel in here.
That was a struggle for you to get through that. Is that the lingering COVID cough? I've got a little one of these like dry ones too. It's tough to play through the pain.
Yeah, COVID 2.0 has not been kind to me. In theory, I'm better, but who knows?
So just to kind of maybe put a bow on this, so it just seems like a crazy thing to put out there. It's not a concern for the network at all. You're also not going to see this step function increase from CPUs to GPUs. You're not going to have this equivalent above ASIC. So it's really a kind of a nothing burger, but it's interesting that, from an influence perspective, that someone was able to get this published in the New York Times. To me, that's maybe the more interesting story, is like, how the heck does this thing actually get published?
Yeah, and that's the crazy thing, is they didn't even bother waiting until they got this thing published in some sort of D-list journal or whatever. They just went ahead and wrote this review of a manuscript, which is just profoundly irregular. That we do know there is this academia to the press pipeline. We see that with the fake science coming out of Digiconomist. Credit to him, he actually does bother getting his work, quote-unquote, published in, quote-unquote, peer-reviewed F-list publications, like the comment pages of Nature Climate Change. So even the Digiconomist plays the game where they hide behind academia and the veneer of academia. In this case, there was no publication. There was no journal. So it's literally just a random Word doc with no actual peer review. So that's the thing that's astounding to me.
So on the topic of the New York Times, looks like they're on board with this inflation narrative. Are they acknowledging inflation this week?
Yeah, so I've excoriated the New York Times the last 10 minutes, but I'm going to give them a rare dub. They actually came clean on inflation. So basically the inflation truthers were right. The shadow stats, quoters, the Chapwood Index users, the M2 and M1 posters, you were right. We were right. The MSM, the inflation deniers, the anti-inflationistas, they were wrong. And the New York Times top Fed writer, Jenna Smialek, she wrote this piece saying, hey, actually, the inflation methodologies are pretty questionable. They're not counting house prices right, which is a critique a lot of us has had, which is the inflation uses owner equivalent rent, which is like a weird sort of fake survey-based metric, and it doesn't incorporate actual data from rental prices or actual house prices. So it understates the inflation rate, and they agree that the inflation rate would be 11-12% if you used real home prices, as opposed to 8% with owner's equivalent rent. They also agree that economists do this weird thing where they assume that people start using cheaper products over time, which also drives down CPI. Like people engage in this substitution. And if you pull that out, inflation also looks higher. So basically, even the New York Times is now admitting, hey, inflation feels like 20-25%. Yeah, maybe your intuition is more correct than the official CPI data. So just wanted to say the inflation truthers were right.
Oh, there you have it. So I think that's it for the week. Sure, we'll have more deals. Certainly, there's a lot going on at Consensus down here. There's like 18,000 people here, apparently. There's no bear market going on down here.
And everybody is wearing, for the most part, long sleeves and pants, and we're all very hot.
Everyone's really hot. There's a lot of there's some ICOs back here. I don't know if you caught that, but there's like some full-blown ICO projects at this conference too.
Yeah, it kind of reminds me of Consensus 2018. I don't know if you went to that one.
Oh, I was there. I've been at every Consensus probably forever.
That's quite the track record. I remember ICO mascots dancing around in was it the Hilton or the Marriott in Manhattan?
Marriott Marquis.
And the price of Bitcoin had drawn down a lot, but not fully. And I remember thinking to myself, bottom's not in.
I know. Well, maybe that means that bottom's not in now.
I would be shocked if it were. Hate to say it.
All right. Well, on that optimistic note, we will be back next week. Have a safe and healthy weekend, and we will see you on Monday.